surprise, I have been saying I'm going to do this for so long, and we're in the thick of it. I had a vision for what I wanted to do in terms of a more longer form podcast style, whether that was going to be a podcast, a YouTube, name it something different, whatever. But I think right now I just want to keep everyone in one place, and that's on this YouTube channel. So this is going to be essentially my version of a pod, and I didn't want it to be like any one thing. So I believe I will probably, over the course of the life of this, bounce from fitness to relationship to life to fashion, let you guys in on what It Girl is, because I've been teasing that. So many things, but I recently made a TikTok and said that I was eventually going to do a video just talking about how I've had to rework my brain as somebody who grew up with an extremely volatile childhood home life, and how as an adult, that's obviously shaped me a lot. But also the thing we always come back to is yeah, I have a sad story too. I also have a sad story, and I think it'd be really ignorant for us to think that everyone doesn't have some version of that, whether it's they were bullied, they were super insecure, they had toxic home life, which is so much more common than we realize. I think as I became an adult and it became a little bit less taboo to talk about, I was we were all dealing with some shit behind closed doors, and especially our generation, my generation, I think it's become a little bit more normalized to talk about. And now the people my age who are becoming parents are so much more aware, and they're trying to break those generational curses, and they're trying to gentle parent and just do things differently, which I commend and I love. And I love seeing it. I will say a content I subscribe to, even though I don't want children, is I love seeing a millennial mom gentle parent the fuck out of their kid, or asking them what are those ones that are say this and you tell me what comes next to the little kid, and they're saying age old things I can't even think of one right now, but they'll be you clean your room, and they'll be or we're going to go to the park. There's no violence. There's no anything. And I think it's just really cool to watch the difference in the generations parent. To say, we're in an era where us as adults probably had some pretty crazy childhoods going on. And I think just there's such a dichotomy between what's happening between people of my age group. I use the reference all the time of two kids grow up with an alcoholic father. One kid looks at his father, says, I don't want to ever be like my dad, and builds a life for himself. The other child becomes an alcoholic, and they say, I learned from my dad. And I certainly fall on the I don't want to be anything like that category. So I live a very different life, and by choice, by conscious decision, by not wanting to grow up and be like my dad, it's shaped me drastically. But at the same time, there's so much decades later that I notice I have to break, and I have to be self-aware enough to do differently. And I want to talk about some of those things, because not everyone is so self-aware. And I think in addition to that, not everyone is aware that they have the ability to change certain things. I was just recently explaining this to somebody. I have heard so many times, wow, you're so normal for having grown up like that. And I think that that's such an interesting statement. But when I step back, I also think about all of the eldest daughter-esque of oh, she was such a pleasure to have in class. She's so polite. She fits in with the grown-ups. And I'll be honest, as a kid, as a people pleaser, that's oh my God, wonderful, right? You just want to be all of those things. But I realized that it like really took away from my childhood, and not in like a negative sense all the time. But I think that at the root of it, it was like I showed up in class and I was like the perfect student, very like, I believe it or not, I was not one of the, at least at a younger age, like, oh, she doesn't talk. I wasn't going home with like she never, like, I can't see her with anyone because she never stops talking and like things like that. Like I was so wired even as a child to be such a people pleaser. And I think at the root of that, like as an adult, I can look at that and reflect that it had a lot more to do with the fact that I couldn't bring any additional stress into the house because I was so afraid of my parents and like the backlash and the repercussions of a bad report card, a bad grade, a bad feedback from my coaches, anything. And, you know, it shapes you because you start to essentially get like those dopamine hits from like, she's a pleasure to have in class, student of the year, which I literally started getting in like first grade. Those little accolades and those little things, well, like this lets me slide under the radar, and it's one less thing for like there to be gripe about in the home. I think like that paints a pretty clear picture because obviously, like I could sit here and recount memories, and I'm sure eventually I'll probably tell specific stories and whatnot. But all of that to say, you become, your senses become very heightened in a household like I lived in because you're constantly trying to suss out what the day is going to be like, what the night is going to bring, or is it going to be a good night or a bad night? And I alluded to this in Connor and I's podcast about like just childhood wounds and what we were talking on the other day. You become so aware of like even just the smallest things. So like, oh, I can tell that the sound of the keys going down on the table in that regard means that dad is angry. I can tell that the way the fridge was just opened means that dad's in a good mood. Those are not normal things for a child to be aware of or be forced to be aware of. And in the past couple of weeks, truly unbeknownst to me, I would love to be inside my own brain and know why I'm like so anxious the last couple of weeks, but I found myself kind of reverting back to those childhood wounds. And like even Connor, like, oh, is that an angry cabinet slam? And I'm like, there's just no such thing in this life anymore. Like that's a past life, but it's crazy how quickly in an anxious state, like that's where my fight or flight goes. And that's kind of what my body is looking for. And so I've noticed that like more than probably ever in me and Connor's relationship, I think there might have been like another time, but I'm extremely reactive and like at no fault to him. He'll be like, hey babe, like, what are you doing today? And I'll be like, why? Like, it's just like a response to feeling like you have to defend yourself all the time. Obviously that's so exhausting, but I did make some notes. So just about things that I've had to kind of rework my brain around as an adult, because I think that obviously what I've just pointed out is not the norm, I would hope. The first time I ever like truly noticed I was having anxiety to the point where I could be like, okay, this is like true anxiety attacks. And like, it was starting to like, I don't even want to say at this point it was affecting my life, but it was like a noticeable piece. Was in college, I had applied for a job. I got the job, but I had a delayed start date, maybe like a couple weeks, probably as much as 45 days. I don't remember the exact circumstances, but I think this is where my like words of affirmation, anxious attachment qualities started coming out, because to me, it was probably the first job that I applied for that was a little bit of a stretch that I really wanted, that was a really good opportunity. And I was a senior in college, so I knew it was going to be setting me up for like some post-grad opportunities as well. And thinking to myself, like, I haven't heard from her in 2 days. Do I still have the job? Do I need to talk to her every day? Like, I kind of felt like I needed that like continuous confirmation that I was set, even though like paperwork was signed, I had a start date. And I would like find myself rereading the text from the hiring manager being like, okay, no, like she said, we're good. Like, I'm good, we're good. And then like 2 hours later, I'd be like, am I good? Like, I'd be back reading the messages again and trying to just talk myself off of like the ledge of like self-doubt. From there, I started to see that show up more in like everyday life. It was just like I needed a lot of like continuous words of affirmation, essentially. And lo and behold, that's probably like my biggest love language. But it's crazy how like as an adult, I can take like a perfectly good sentence in any scenario. It can be like my bodybuilding coach, it can be my boss, it could be Connor, it could be anyone, especially if it's something that I like genuinely care about. So we'll use bodybuilding as an example. This is just like me making it up, but if they were like, this is really good, we should work on this week, I immediately take that to shreds and I'm like, okay, it's not good enough that we don't have to work on something. This is what they actually meant. It's not good enough for the stage. It's not. And like, I like take it in spiral. And I will say, like in the past year, especially, I've definitely improved exponentially. For anyone that's been around long enough from at least my prep last year, you can imagine that that's how I landed in the situation I was in Miami when I dropped out of the show and like told the world I was quitting bodybuilding and then was in prep 2 days later. Who did that? Yeah. Anyway, so it's those things that I was allowing myself to really like rapidly spin out of control. And it was a combination of a lot of things, right? Because obviously you become what you put into the universe. So like I was putting that out into the universe and I was allowing that to happen because I was just shredding every piece of feedback, every check-in, every response, myself, comparison, everything was very, 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 very unhealthy from a mental place. It's something that I'm never going to make the excuse that, oh, it's just how I am. Because I think that really like goes back to that child that's like, well, that's just who I am. Like my dad was an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic. It runs in our family. It's genetic. I don't believe that, but I do think personality traits are deeply embedded in us. And then it is our job as adults to grow and change and evolve and develop and change those things. So I do think that there's always going to be work to be done. And I recognize that there's still just lingering pieces of childhood wounds that sit inside Summer's brain and say like, but have you thought about it from this angle? And like, you know, I think one of the biggest things that my husband has drilled into me probably since the day we met in prep as bodybuilders, like your mental is always going to be your demise. And until you work on that, you're never going to amount to what you want to be in this sport. And unfortunately, and if any of you tell him I said this, I'll kill you, but he's right, you know, and like as soon as I started really improving my mental and like really putting an effort into therapy, really putting an effort into like the way I think about things, detaching, things improved. Weird. Problem with bodybuilding is that it's just so subjective and it's so, you have to like detach from the fact that your physique is like the thing that's being feedbacked and judged and critiqued at all times. And like, that's why the sport truly isn't for everyone. And I've never had like a body image eating disorder or anything of that nature, but I do like, we obviously do this because we take pride in the way we look and things like that. So it's just one of those things where like, sometimes I have to really step back and be like, it's not personal, even though it feels so personal because it's your body. it's not like, well, if the wind hadn't done that, we would have hit the ball. It's like, it's very much just a different attachment to like the outcome, because it's the way you walk around. It's how you present yourself. It's how you enter a room. It's so many things. And that's why I think it just is challenging on a different level, obviously. So yeah, I would say like that voice that started speaking to me, especially in like my college years, has not only grown, but also been put a little bit more under control. But it took a lot of work. And I don't think people say like self-help books and podcasts and therapy and all these things, and we toss all these like hot words around, but I feel like people don't recognize how much work it actually takes to change something that's that deeply embedded in you. I would say I've been like genuinely working on these things for like 4 to 5 years. And that's like 4 to 5 years where at stints I was doing therapy like at a minimum of once a week, sometimes more. There was parts of like last year when I was really trying to like make sure I got on stage with a good head on my shoulders that I was doing EMDR 2 times a week, like 3 times every 10 days, like a lot. And I attribute my ability to like turn my season around so much to that. You know, to put it into perspective, that like I went in there thinking it was bodybuilding that was the problem, and we need to work through whatever's holding me up from like getting me on stage, and whatever that mental block is that like is telling me like, no, I can't do this. And at the root of it, it was actually just childhood, because I have been so deeply rooted in like people pleasing and perfectionism, because I only had good nights at home and I only wasn't the target at home when I was those things. And so it's kind of been like my shield my whole life, because it was like, well, if I can at least control how I show up, if I can like be as perfect as possible, which we know is so unrealistic, especially for a 10-year-old, then like there's no fights. I'm not in trouble. I'm not grounded. I'm not getting yelled at. I'm not getting, whatever. So in the realm of like things that I've had to rewire my brain on, coming back to listening for the signs that something's wrong. I mean, that one doesn't show up super often, but I think I just like, especially since it's happening right now, I just have to remember and remind myself a lot of internal dialogue that like, that means nothing. The biggest one is, we used to like tiptoe around it. And a lot of times my dad would never come out and be like, this is the problem, or this is why you're in trouble. Most likely because there wasn't a legitimate reason or excuse or whatever. But the, approach that I've adopted as an adult is, if there's a problem, this is in my logical brain, the person is going to express that and tell me like an adult. And until they do, it's not my issue to address. Obviously, there's some caveats to that, because if somebody's acting short-tempered or passive or not answering me or being whatever, then obviously there's a conversation to be had. But if I just like feel like something's off, or I feel like maybe we had a weird interaction, or and I'm able to go about my normal day and routine and whatever, I'm not going to sit there and be hyper focused on, was that passive? Was that weird? Because until they bring it to the forefront of my mind, this comes back to like the what ifs scenario. We waste so much time on what ifs, and that's something I've really like worked to not, because what if that was like her being upset with me? Well, if it is, she's going to tell me, and I'm not going to waste another minute of my day on it. What if this employee's quitting? Well, what if they are? If they are, then I'm going to have to come up with a strategy to figure it out, and we'll work through it. Because one of the things my mom and me always said, and like we said this the day my dad died, we said this when we had to not be in the house for 3 weeks while they redid all the floors due to whatever, like so many things, we just always looked at each other and said, figure it out. We always do. And that's really like, I'm thankful for that lesson, because you have survived 100% of your worst days, and you're going to continue to survive them. So whether that means you have to strategize, you have to lean on somebody, you have to figure it out, you have to eat shit. Like sometimes you have to eat shit. And those are just lessons that I'm thankful I've learned, and maybe not everyone learns them. I don't know, but you're going to figure it out. And then The other one I wrote down was not everything means something. Like, not every interaction, weird situation, like whatever, it doesn't always allude to something. So similar to my last point is, if it hasn't been addressed, it's not been brought to your attention, then it might not mean anything. And so just like, there's so much ease in going about your day, just a little bit more, like, I don't want to say oblivious, unattached, you know what I mean? Because if it's going to be an issue, if it's going to affect my life, they're going to bring it to me. If Connor's mad at me, he's going to bring it to me. If he's not, I'm just going to go about my day. And like, if he's acting off, maybe he's having an off day, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's at me. And I think that was like really hard to understand. So like, I can give some examples of this, but for me, it's really, really, really triggering just because of how I found out my dad had passed. When somebody like looks at a phone and like makes a reaction and then like continues to read or whatever to like absorb the rest of the information and doesn't key me into like what is happening. So if you pick up your phone and you go, and I'm going, what? Because my heart has now stopped, you know? And they're like still reading the rest of the email, or they're still reading the rest of that text message before they can then conclude that and tell me why the initial reaction. I get really upset because it's triggering for me. It's not everyone else's responsibility to understand that. And people that are close to me do. Like Connor certainly is like tries to be more aware of it because he used to do it a lot. And as you can imagine, when he's coaching 50 plus odd clients, like there's a lot of like, or like whatever reactions when he reads something initially. And so he's definitely improved on it, but it's also not his job to like constantly nurture my childhood wounds. Like as much as it is as his wife, it's not. And I think some of the biggest mistakes I've made as an adult is like expecting other people to shield me from those things, because obviously it's nice to feel respected and well taken care of and thought of in those scenarios. But it's exhausting to walk around and constantly be like, I can't react to my phone. And I feel like that's also super unrealistic. So I've just had to like really adapt my way of thinking and recognize that like if they do it, it's also not them being like, let me get back at Summer. It's very unmalicious and very just like, I'm a human. That's how I'm going to react. So not everything means something. Not everything has to have a reaction. Not everything has to be brought to the forefront. And a little bit of oblivion, like a little bit of being oblivious, a little bit is good. Like if you just live freely and mindlessly and don't think about anyone around you, that's a completely different conversation. But a little bit is good for the soul, because it just takes that extra layer of stress out of the equation that's unnecessary. The one other note I had in here is just like another quality I really had to adjust, which comes back to the people pleasing, is just that you're not going to be more well loved, well liked, more respected from being perfect, making yourself small, trying the hardest, working the hardest. You're also not, your self-worth is not based on your performance. So like those were things that have come up for me a lot in life. And I have at many times allowed my self-worth to be tied into like bodybuilding placings, KPIs at jobs, how much money I make in a year, like just so many things, because I am a true like go-getter in so many things. And if you ask Connor, I'm like so tenacious, but like tenacious to a fault. And I just want to remind you guys that being a savage is awesome. Being your goal weight is awesome. Being the hardest worker in the room has positive benefits. Crushing your job and making a lot of money obviously has so many benefits, and like that's all great. But when they bury you one day, they're not going to write on your grave like how much money you made that year, what size jeans you were. And it sounds so cliche. I lost a lot of like really good years, like making the most money I've ever made because I was so anxious, stressed, and felt worthless because every bad day I had was like, well, I'm not good enough. I'm not enough. My self-worth was entirely tied to like whether I was the best performing person on that day compared to others. All of those things stem back to like ways I've had to rewire my brain, and it's come from really hard lessons. Like it's really hard to sit back and be like, damn, I wasted 2 years at a job where I could have like felt differently about myself or built these character traits, and instead it was just like beat myself down, beat myself down, beat myself down, beat myself down. So just a reminder that you're worth a lot more than those things. And I hope this first episode was super helpful. I hope it like helps you to think about whether you can relate to them or not. I'm sure that there's somewhere you can tie them back to and be like, oh, yeah, maybe that was a helpful takeaway. Or maybe I said something that like your therapist has been drilling in you for 10 years and you heard it differently today. And if so, my Venmo is, no, I'm kidding. But yeah, I'm really excited to do more of these. Like, subscribe, comment. I'm going to leave them on my main channel for now. I might eventually make it its own separate situationship. Welcome to the page. If you're new here, I will drop in the bio all of the places you can find me otherwise, and go touch grass. Bye.